Imagine walking into a room and you have got everybody's attention from the first words that come out of your mouth. The very art of influence. My name is Joya Dass. I've spent 20 years as a news anchor here in New York City. And what does that mean for you? Well, I had to every hour pick 3 stories about 3 companies and make them compelling for my audience. And I had to do it under 2 minutes. I've given a TED Talk on rethinking failure. I've since given that talk about 13 more times. I've given many keynotes. And today what I'm most proud of is that I have a leadership platform for women. And one of the top ways that I teach leadership is through powerful communication. So this is in my wheelhouse, and I'm so happy to share with you 6 tips today on the art of influence. Number 1 is to know your audience. Know your audience. So how do you do that? Well, anytime a host body or organization asks me to give a keynote or speak to their group, the first thing that I do is ask them, could you put me in touch with 6 of the people that are planning to be in the room when I give my talk? I want to be able to pre-interview them for 15 minutes one-on-one. Why do I do that? I could come in and give my talk about my life story, and I could share what I think I've divined in a silo that my audience needs. But that's not truly being of service. That's not truly offering some takeaways and tactical advice for the issues that are keeping my audience up at night. So I want to know what's keeping them up at night. I want to know what their pain points are. Let me give you an example. So a couple years ago, I was asked to give a keynote at the Asian American Hotel Owners Association. Now, this association was celebrating 30 years. It was a big milestone year. And for the first time, women hoteliers numbered in critical mass. So they were hosting a luncheon, and they wanted me to come in and give the motivational keynote to kick off the lunch. Perfectly fine. I could have gone in and given my TED Talk. I could have given my life story about how I've overcome obstacles to come to New York City and live out my dream of becoming a news anchor as a girl born to Indian immigrant parents. But that wouldn't necessarily meet my audience where they are. So I pre-interviewed 6 women, thanks to the host body for connecting me. And it turns out that many of these women, while they were working in the hotel industry, they were grandfathered in. Their parents emigrated here, and it was fully expected that they were going to work in the industry. Not everybody had complained about that, but some of these women really felt like they had their own desires. They had their own dreams that remained unrealized, and they still wanted to see them through. So I did give my talk about how I crafted my career, but the 6 takeaways that I left with the audience was, if you want to pursue your passion, here are 6 ways for you to dedicate even 1 hour a week to making it happen. So I created a handy dandy worksheet for you. It's got scripts in there on how you can make the ask the next time you are asked to give a talk about how you can interview or pre-interview 6 of the people that are going to be in the room. I've also included 3 tools that make it very easy to streamline the process so that you can get right down to doing those interviews that are so important for you to add value. Tip number 2 is to become an amazing storyteller. And stories, especially personal stories, are so easy to tell because it's your lived experience. So the mistake people do is that they'll get up and tell the entire story of their life. But really what you need to do is just pick one micro moment in time, describe it in great detail, add a little bit of drama, add a little bit of emotion, and then distill your understandings of having gone through that moment. So let me explain the science behind why I said what I just said. Evolution-wise, we've got 3 brains. We've got the reptilian brain, which is a very primal brain. It's what's primed for fight or flight responses, right? We're in danger, we need to get out of the way. There are chemicals that start coursing through your body. Your heart rate goes up so that you can make sure that you get out of danger. There is the emotional brain, better known as the limbic system. This is the part of your brain when you hear something sad or you're watching something really moving on the news. There are chemicals that are released because that's why you cry. And then there is the rational brain. This is the part that is responsible for rational thought, executive functions, deep processing. So when you just present data to me, you may only be engaging one of those brains, the one that's capable of rational thought, the last one that I talked about. But when you tell me a story with a little bit of drama, a little bit of higher highs, a little bit of lower lows, you engage all 5 senses. You engage all 3 brains. So for you to not do that is a missed opportunity. Let me give you an example. There were 2 sets of architects that were bidding for a job. It was essentially the renovation of an airport. And the first firm came in and offered, their expertise, their resume, a bunch of data points about, what the renovation would cost and the budget and so on and so forth. The second firm came in and shared a story. They shared a story about a previous renovation they had done at an airport. Now, this was a really time-sensitive job because it was readying the airport for the all-too-busy Christmas shopping rush. All of the vendors that surrounded the area that was going to be renovated were going to be impacted by this renovation. In other words, they were going to have to be shut down for a period of time, but ready to open for that Christmas rush on Christmas Eve day. So the architects planned everything, they came in, they started to do the design, and something happened. Something happened which forced them to work through the night. And at 6 a.m. on Christmas Eve morning, they laid down the last tile adjacent to those vendor stalls before the first patron walked through that airport. Now, who do you think got the job? It was the firm that shared a very dramatic, emotional story about a previous job that they had done. You see the difference? So here's a little worksheet for you that I'm going to share. And on that worksheet, I'd love for you to set the timer for 2 minutes. And in 4 quadrants, I'd love for you to share what you saw today, what you smelled today, what you heard today, and what you did today. This exercise is a little bit of a meditation, but it's really forcing you to think about how you engage all 5 senses when you are telling a compelling story. Net, how do you influence people? It's by creating an experience. How do you create an experience? It's by telling an emotional and compelling story. You have all the tools at your fingertips. You've just got to be that descriptive and that specific when you are sharing your story. Now, I don't want to leave money lying on the table. It's also important for you to share what you learned as a result of having gone through that very trying job of putting down tile on the renovation of an airport, or whatever your scenario is. Now, you remember tip number 1 was to know your audience. Tip number 3 is to really make sure you're tailoring your talk to your audience. I've talked about this in tips number 1 and 2, but now I'm going to really advance it for you. So I have given my TED Talk, which is on the topic of rethinking failure, 13 times, as I mentioned. But I've given it at various audiences because it was probably the one personal story that I've really workshopped to death, and I know that I can tell it really, really well. But I've said it in front of domestic violence organizations. I've told it in front of a hoteliers conference. I've told it in front of pharmaceutical companies, right? But I've always taken the last 6 tips and tailored them to the audience that I was speaking to. So let me give you an example of a speech that I really, really love. Steve Jobs' commencement speech at Stanford in 2005. Now, he was asked to come in and share of his life lessons as he sent off the class of 2005 into the big bad world. So he chose to tell 3 stories. The first story that he talked about was when he dropped out of college. Maybe not the best thing to tell a graduating class, but there was a point to it. He dropped out of college and because he didn't see the point in it, and he decided to audit a few classes. And one of the classes that he audited was a calligraphy class. And he thought to himself, when am I ever going to use a calligraphy class? Like ever? Well, today, the suite of fonts that you see in Microsoft Word are because of Steve Jobs taking that calligraphy class. So the lesson that he wraps up that story with is, lead your life. Life has a way of connecting the dots. The second story that he tells is about getting fired from Apple, the company that he founded. Well, he was like, okay, and he went off and he founded Pixar, still mired in the work that he loved. And guess what? A handful of years later, Apple hired him back. So the lesson that he ties that story up in a bow with is, do work that you love. The work will find you. And the final story that he tells is about being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors, of course, said that he had a very limited time to live. He outlived that diagnosis by 2 years. But he culminates that story in the lesson that you should only live your life on your own terms, not as it was dictated by anyone else. And the final grand poobah of takeaways that he leaves the graduating class of Stanford in 2005 with is this. He had a favorite magazine when he was growing up, and that magazine was going out of print. And so on the last edition, the last page of that magazine, there was a saying. It said, stay hungry, stay foolish. And so he said in his parting words to the class of 2005, I encourage you to question things, to stay hungry, and stay foolish. Because if Steve Jobs had really towed the line of convention and gone to college and wallowed in the fact that he was fired from the company that he founded, that he was diagnosed to essentially die in a very limited amount of time, he wouldn't have created the legacy that he left behind. So he tailored his life stories to the young people that were going to be in the audience and were going to go out into the world and still make their impact. So on the worksheet below, I want you to do a little exercise. Decide on the audience that you are going to speak to. What message do you want to leave them with? Now go back into your life and pick the story that supports that message. Maybe it's a time that you learned what it's like to overcome failure. Maybe it was a time that you made a huge mistake and you now understand the ramifications of having made that mistake. Now, don't just leave it as a Dear Diary entry. Remember to finish out with the 3 things that you learned as a result of going through that experience. That is the gift for your audience. I love that I'm spending this time with you on this recording, but if you would like to be in a live masterclass with me, get feedback from your small group of peers, get feedback from me, and really practice in front of a group, practice the craft of public speaking, I have a masterclass that I teach live. The next cohort of 5 starts up in October. DM me at this email address and let's work together. Tip number 4 is to always be accessible. I often run into this with people that work in really technical fields, machine learning or pharmaceuticals. They're very much inclined to get into the technical jargon. But here's what the missed opportunity is. I remember hearing a trial lawyer once say that when they were speaking to a jury, and everything is on the line, if you share a word that nobody understands, they don't hear the next 10 words that you say. And if it's a matter of life or death, you pretty well want to make sure that your jury is listening to every single word that comes out of your mouth. So the same thing applies when you're giving a talk. It's very easy to say, gosh, this really exacerbated everything. There's another way to say it. This just made it harder. So in the words of Ernest Hemingway, pick monosyllabic words, pick shorter sentences, always be accessible to your audience. I'll give you an example. I had a member who insisted that her business model was that she did somatic business coaching. And I had a speaker who was incredibly intelligent, and he said, I don't actually even know what that is. And so again, it's a missed opportunity if people don't know what it is that you do. A better way to say, I do somatic business coaching, is that I work on your body and I work on your business all at the same time. So on your worksheet, I'd love for you to share 5 words that are technical to your profession, or 5 words that you find yourself often using, And then right next to it, write an easier, more accessible word that you could substitute out. Let's break it down about the different parts of body language that impact your audience and your ability to influence. Eyes are number one. Eye contact is really, really important, and here's why. When you stop making eye contact, you give your audience permission to think about something else. They can think about their laundry list. They can think about when they got to pick up their kids. They can think about what they need to do at work. The point is that they are not listening to you and you aren't influencing them. Number two is to really think about the power pose. Shoulders back, feet akimbo, planted on the ground. Amy Cuddy did a really popular TED Talk on this topic, but there's actually something chemically released in your body when you are adopting this posture. Feet akimbo, really drilled into the ground, shoulders back. A power pose is exactly that. It's channeling confidence to whoever you're speaking to. When you're talking to someone, look down at their feet. If they're still engaged and want to keep talking to you, their feet are pointed towards you. If they're trying to get out of the conversation, chances are their feet are pointed away. So this is a great way for you to maybe start thinking about how you read your audience in real time when you're in the room. Take a look at their feet. Take a look at your feet. Are you still interested in being in the room? And finally, one of the biggest tips that I offer my students when it comes to really understanding your body language is to record yourself. Everybody has a phone now. All you have to do for 1 minute a day is do a thought dump. The best thing that happened to me today, the worst thing that happened to me today. Do a minute's worth of thought dump into your phone, exactly the way that I am doing now, and then go back and review it. Don't just record it and walk away. Review it and see what tics you have. See what filler words are cropping up in your speech. And really think about ways that you could be much more effective if you built awareness. The recording is really just doing that, building awareness around your idiosyncrasies. So your homework right now, if you have a worksheet, is to just record yourself for 1 minute. You can share about your day, you can share about your favorite color or anything you want, and then take some notes. Take some notes about what you see. What is it that you like to correct? How would you like to show up better? Tip number 6 is leveraging the power of the pause. We live in such a society where silence is the anomaly. Silence actually gets people to look up from their phones when nothing is happening, right? So you can actually strategically use silence when you are talking. One of the ways that I love to use silence is when I want to let things land. I'll give you an example. I grew up in a middle-class white neighborhood in Pennsylvania. I never felt like I belonged. I then went on to a very expensive private college with a 2% minority rate. I definitely never felt like I belonged, especially since I was paying my own way. It wasn't until I got to New York City, scared shitless, seeing people of all shapes, all sizes, all colors walking down the street, that I finally felt at home. You see how I used silence to really let things land in that scenario. A couple of other ways to use silence is to pause when people are applauding, pause when people are laughing, pausing when people are reacting in strong ways to whatever it is that you said, because you don't want to keep barreling through to the next thing you have to say. You want to be able to let them have their moment. They're engaging with you. It's important to be able to use that. And then the final way to leverage the power of the pause is if you lose track of your thoughts. It is perfectly okay to stop, say, I need a second to gather my thoughts, and start again. I guarantee it's going to get everybody to look up at you much faster than if you just kept going on. Our tendency as human beings is to use a lot of filler words, right? We love to use filler words. So. I like to use so a lot myself. But if you can just pause rather than barreling through to the next sentence with a bunch of filler words in between, you are going to be so much more influential because you are ultimately that confident in what it is that you're delivering. So your homework assignment is, the next time that you're giving a talk in a meeting, use the power of the pause. And then journal afterwards what it is that came up for you. How did the audience react? How did you feel? Your brain is usually going a lot faster than the environment. And so what feels like 30 seconds feels like an eternity in your brain. So just be cognizant of that. But those are my 6 tips on the art of influence. If you would love to work with me, I teach a public speaking masterclass for women who want to be more powerful leaders and do it through more powerful communications. It typically lasts about 7 to 8 weeks. You can always DM me at joya@joyadass.com. It's down here, down below for your reference. And if you would like to just further your leadership, know that powerful communication is baked into the way that I do leadership development. I have a mastermind, and you are welcome to join that. That kicks off in January. Again, you can always subscribe to my channel on YouTube. The link is down below, and good luck.